And welcome to this week's episode of Making It in Asheville. This is your local podcast where we interview Asheville makers, artists, entrepreneurs, community leaders. We ask them what they are making and how they are making it in Asheville. Podcast started in 2019 when my wife and I moved to town. We had no idea how we were going to make it in Asheville. So we thought we'd ask some people what they're doing. And it's been an absolute thrill ride. Today, we're being joined by Josh Dorfman, the CEO, founder, entrepreneur behind Simbly, but not just Simbly. It's been a very long, very exciting career in what I'll call media, specifically sustainable and sustainability and green media. We will ask as many questions as he'll allow about his story and what brought him to Asheville. We have seemingly a similar past. Asheville by way of Brooklyn, at least at some point. And so without further ado, Josh, please introduce yourself and give us a moment of your own tweetable introduction.
Well, Tony, first of all, wonderful to be here. And congrats on what you're doing with the podcast. I think it's fantastic. I've had a great run here in Asheville. We've been here for about 7 years. I am the co-founder and CEO of Simbly. This is a modern, sustainable furniture company that we are making from here, just down the road, 20 minutes down the road in Hendersonville, with our headquarters here. And I have worked in entrepreneurship here. I was the director of Venture Asheville for a number of years. I built our angel investor group, Asheville Angels. Worked at the Collider, working on climate entrepreneurship and innovation here in town. So, this is such a great place to be for creative entrepreneurship and accessing resources and pursuing those kinds of visions. So, it's been great and really enjoyable.
Well, thank you for making time to have this conversation. We met, I want to say, through Venture Asheville. I don't exactly remember. We had coffee at Waterbird, which I think both of our neighborhood spots. I think RIP Waterbird at this point, but and we got connected and acquainted back when people got coffee, which seems like a lifetime ago. And I was absolutely floored by how much you've touched. And so just in Asheville, I heard perhaps 3 of the most important small business. I use startups and small business differently, but at least small business or startup resources. Venture Asheville, the Collider is, if I'm not mistaken, focused on green sustainability efforts and co-working, and then the Asheville Angels. And so that's incredible to me, but it started so much earlier than that, according to my understanding of your story. And so I would love to, before we jump back, which I'm very excited to do, I want to hear just a couple more minutes worth, let's say, of a conversation about Simbly, because I am looking at the Simbly homepage. Beautiful website, beautiful product. Give us a high level. What's going on at Simbly today? How long have you been in the business? What's exciting? What's a mile marker that's happened recently?
Yeah. So Simbly is a business that I started conceiving 3 or 4 years ago when I was looking at, broadly at the consumer marketplace and sustainable or eco-friendly products, which has been a passion of mine for a number of years, and certainly some other businesses I've started or been involved in. And I started thinking that there was really some white space, this kind of opportunity in sustainable furniture, because there's just not a lot of really great product there's just not a lot of product available in the market. Yeah. And I thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to pursue a business where you could focus on sustainability as core to the mission, really beautiful design. In our case, we focus on modern design, making it in America, and doing it at a fair, attractive price. If you could bring those 4 things together, right? Sustainability, great design, made in America, fair price, then, which is so hard to do, so hard to pull all of those off. You can pull off 2 pretty easily, maybe 3, but bringing that whole value proposition together seemed like a great challenge and would be satisfying in its own right if we could make it happen.
Mhm.
And so I have a designer who I've worked with in the past, who essentially formed the kind of creation of the Simply aesthetic. We reconnected a few years ago and said, hey, these are our values. Why don't we give this a shot? And I started realizing, like, I'm in furniture country. We're in this part of the world that has a long history and heritage of actually being the furniture making capital of the world. A lot of that production had gone overseas, and I thought it would be really cool to be part of a story about revitalizing that side of our economy, around manufacturing, around craftsmanship, particularly around furniture, and to create those kinds of economic opportunities for people who might be involved in what we do. And so that's a little bit of the backstory. Where we are today, we have a kind of our capsule collection in market. It's been picked up by West Elm, and so
I was going to drop that if you didn't, because when I Googled you, I saw a West Elm ad, which I was like, oh, this is huge. How long have you been in West Elm? Sorry for interjecting.
Not at all. We probably started that relationship about a year and a half ago.
Exciting.
And it's developed over time. It's been fantastic for us. They found us, and what I'm describing to you is kind of that value proposition, the four things. It resonated with their buyers. And so they found us kind of early as we were still trying to figure out our brand. We'd done our first kind of photo shoot. We didn't really feel like it lined up with what we wanted, our kind of visual and aesthetic and how we wanted to be represented. But so it was still rough, but yet the what we were attempting to do in America resonated with them, and we started exploring a partnership. And so we sell today. We designed our company to be direct to consumer, which is this trend that has taken off wildly. And so that's also how we can achieve our more attractive price points, because we don't bake in all the wholesale costs and all our other things that eventually make the price just much more expensive for an end consumer. But we were able, even within that, to work with West Elm to make the relationship work for them and for us. And it's just been, from a credibility point of view, from an access to sales point of view, it's just been really wonderful.
Wow. Okay. So that seems like if I'm attempting to build a product, it seems like the end goal would be get into West Elm or like get into a place like a West Elm. What I'm hearing is that a lot of what has happened or is happening in Simply was by design. Like it seemed like you were very, I'll call it pragmatic or like thoughtful in identifying a market, identifying a space in a market, identifying brand values and a concept early, as opposed to maybe finding it backwards, saying like, I really want to build a table, or I really want to build a thing. And then what could the brand be? What could we stand for? What might the rest of the collection feel like? And I think that is meaningful. I don't know if everyone approaches problems in that way.
I'm not sure that
maybe it just sounds
do, but no, it is intentional, and it's intentional because I've learned some hard lessons. Because I, as a mission-driven entrepreneur, someone who cares deeply about sustainability, I have pursued projects where it was just like, I'm just going to do this because I want to make organic cotton clothing, or I just want to these are my values. And I have learned, and in those moments where I am asked, just the other day, I was doing a podcast for some students, and they were saying, well, what would you tell us if we were starting a business and thinking? I would say, make sure that as much as you care about the planet or sustainability or the environment, whatever you are attempting to build and sell, that there is a market for it, that there is, and it's almost like you have to say, because people are so passionate today, and so many entrepreneurs are so passionate, particularly around, a social mission or environmental mission. I feel like the discipline is to say, okay, remove all your values from the product itself, and you're just left with the product for a minute. Would somebody still want to buy that product, right? Like, is it on its face, compelling? Because if it is, and then you can infuse it with all of the values, you'll make it that much more desirable for consumers, but it has to be able to stand alone without doubt to really succeed. Because the thing about doing this type of entrepreneurship, whether it's social driven or environmental driven, when it's values driven, and you're embedding, like in our case, so we use Forest Stewardship Council certified wood, FSC certified wood. So we know that our wood has come from a forest that is sustainably managed with all sorts of benefits to indigenous people who rely on forests for their living. I mean, for ecosystems. But I know once I embed that value into my product, that environmental value into the product itself, into the material, into the finishes, the more we can sell and ramp up our business, the more good we're doing for the planet, because we're taking business away from conventional choices that don't consider those kinds of things, right? So that's the key. Like, growth is still the key, but you just have to make sure that someone's going to love your product for what it is.
Yeah, a metaphor that's coming to mind for me is the idea of, that's salt on a meal. Like, if added appropriately, it makes it fantastic, but it's not the meal, right? Like, the design, the product is, at the end of the day, what the consumer is buying. You lean too heavy into the salt and you're pushing people away. You hit it just right, and it makes for a tasty dish. What you're, I think, finished with is something that's perhaps even bigger than that, which throws the salt metaphor away, which says that the global, like the macro good that you get to do by out competing a traditional business or someone that's not using as much care as you are in how you source products is like, I don't know, the dessert. It's the cherry on top. It's something that I don't know how many businesses can say that is part of what they're out, playing for is the big change.
I would say, Tony, there are increasingly a lot of businesses after creating that tasty dish, right? The global tasty dish. And it's a movement that's grown for years. I mean, you can go back and the same, the companies that were most inspiring kind of at the beginning, or sort of the beginning. Yeah. When I think about, for me, the beginning of like consumer facing sustainable businesses, you look at Patagonia, you look at Whole Foods, you look at Seventh Generation, and then it's been filled in by tons of interesting businesses, from a Tesla with an electric car to these really cool footwear companies like Allbirds. I see, the cool kids in Asheville walking around with their Allbirds all made from wool and natural materials, or a company called Rothy's, which is 3D printing really beautiful shoes for women using recycled materials, and super cool. And a lot of these companies are now valued at over $1 billion. Yeah. And it's a movement, and it's growing. So we are part of that. And that's what's exciting too. I have more colleagues, more peers, more folks doing really wonderful things.
And so this might be a perfect opportunity. When would you, Patagonia, that's just like 60s or something, right? So maybe somewhere between the 60s and 90s. Like, when would you say that this movement hopped on your radar? And then this might be the perfect way to kind of recap your story to Asheville, which I find absolutely fascinating. The media mogul and the background that you have is seeming to me, it's like crazy. I'm fascinated by it.
Well, one, thank you. Two, it's hard, I suppose, to separate those two things out. So I'll kind of start answering your question and then just stop me or redirect me. Right?
Perfect.
But I first started thinking about the possibilities around sustainable lifestyles and consumer product in business school in the late 90s. And, I'd spent a couple of years in China prior to that, teaching English, and then traveling around China selling bike locks for a company called Kryptonite that made, like, at least at the time, Kryptonite bike locks.
I have the forget about it lock, the New York unbreakable. Yeah, right. Air quotes,
Can't be
unbreakable.
Done. Can't be done. Yeah, exactly. So, it's a story in itself, but my sort of environmental awakening and epiphany came from the time I spent in China, which wasn't my intention, but I just started seeing so much infrastructure being built as the country was developing so fast, with tunnels and highways and bridges and you could see the writing on the wall eventually, like, holy cow, there's going to be a billion people here driving cars, and some light bulbs started going off. Like, that's probably problematic, unless we figure how to do things sustainably. But when I was in business school, I was in this entrepreneurship class, and I was working on this project and doing a lot of market research. It wasn't sustainable lifestyle, but it was the same set of research around something that's called LOHAS, Lifestyles of Health and Sustainability. And it's essentially this idea that there's actually a massive market and tons of people, millions of people interested in shopping their values around the environment and social responsibility. There's questions always of, will they pay more for such products? I tend to always doubt that research when the answer is yes, because I've never seen it borne out in practice. But nonetheless, this increasing consciousness amongst consumers, right? And so I was working on this totally random business at the time that I was calling Brain Charge, which was like this idea that there would be like a mental fitness gym that you would go to, or maybe like embed a mental fitness gym in the physical workout gym. So you'd like go in there and like play mind games or like get hooked up.
Is it still like early 2000s because it's not an app yet? You're not saying it's
pre-apps, any sort of like iPhone ecosystem of apps. It was just like me and and I was getting like a global MBA, and all these people who were just like, even the professors were like, nah, we don't know. That I don't know if that's a good idea. And I was like, no, it is, because people
20
really
years early, yeah.
And you got baby boomers, right? And they're gonna want to stay sharp. And I still actually think it's a good idea. My dad actually just found the business plan in his basement and gave it to me. I was like, yeah, I think this could work still. But it triggered me into this notion of hey, there's a market potentially for products and services and solutions that embody these values. And so that's kind of where the spark was triggered. It took a whole bunch of years for me to figure out how to kind of build some businesses around that and put it into practice.
Sure. And I'm going to throw out a buzzword, and maybe not a buzzword, but a important couple words from the story. And I'm thinking the lazy environmentalist. Yeah. So at some point that starts. When does that start?
So that started 2005. So the business that I ended up starting, taking this research, really thinking about how to, what role I was going to play around sustainability, which was really important to me. And, I kicked around a whole bunch of different jobs, went through the .com boom bust. But eventually I decided I was actually going to start what became my first modern sustainable furniture company. It was just, I was on the retail side. I wasn't actually a manufacturer like we are today. And I was building that company. And my first employee, on her last day working for me, I'd started the business in Washington, D.C. I'd actually gone into a PhD program at George Washington University in political science for maybe 2/3 of a year, until I was like, no way can I spend my life doing this. And I was like, I'll just start an eco-friendly consumer products company, because that seems like a cool thing to do. And so I did, and it was really focused on design, but I decided to go to Brooklyn because that's where, as you mentioned, so I moved up to Greenpoint because that's where a number of these really interesting designers were located, right? That were doing furniture. And there was one company called Scrap Pile that was taking pianos from, broken pianos or broken parts or whatever from Steinway pianos, their factory, and turning them into gorgeous furniture. It was
wow.
Really amazing. And anyway, so she was not making this trip with me up to Brooklyn. This was her last day working for me, Lucy, and she has heard me tell the story, but she kind of laid into me on this last day, when I wasn't her boss anymore, and she could just speak her mind for me being a terrible environmentalist in my personal life. And, she's like, you're always in the shower. We were building this little e-commerce company out of my apartment. You barely recycle, you're the worst. And yet your whole life is dedicated to helping consumers shift their behavior. You're just a giant hypocrite. I hate you. And I'm out of here. And so I took that to heart. And not only did I take it to heart, I had come across, quick aside, but I heard Michael Crook, the CEO of Patagonia in 2004 at a conference, give a speech. It was actually, I mentioned LOHAS. It was a LOHAS conference, this lifestyles of health, right? Where he was the lunch and keynote speaker, and it's Patagonia, and it's cool, but it's lunch, so people are eating and chit-chatting and not really paying too much attention to him. But then he says, last year, the recycled content in our fleeces was like 80%. This year, we're at 60%. We are failing as a company. And you can imagine, like, every knife and fork drops and everyone turns, are like, what is Michael talking about? Patagonia's failing. And his point was, we're still really good, but our customers expect honesty from us and transparency from us. And we hold ourselves to a certain standard. And the insight that I had was, like, the more honest Patagonia is, and the more transparent, even if they're not perfect, like, the more their consumers love them. Like, the more they turn, like, customers into evangelists, right? Because people know that sustainability is hard. Sure. You know it in their own lives, right? And so I thought, I'll just take that to heart with my little company. And I wrote this blog called The Lazy Environmentalist. I was like, here's the deal. I take really long showers. I do my best thinking in the shower. I'm not going to change. I know I'm using water. I know I'm using energy to heat that water. And, like, I don't feel great about that, but yet I'm not changing. And so what I need is a super duper low flow shower head with absolutely incredible, pressure, so I can stay in that shower as long as I need to do my best thinking, but vastly reduce my impact on the environment. And I need that to happen in every aspect of my life. And if it does, and if you industry figure that out for me, I'll buy those things if I can afford them, right? Yeah. Like, I care. I'm lazy. I'm a lazy environmentalist. And so I just put it out there. I was like, this is how I want to lead my company. I'm going to be very authentic. And 2 weeks later, a radio producer calls me up, and for an online radio station, I can't even remember now. He's like, this is, like, really interesting. Do you want to have a radio show? And I thought, yeah, I do, because I have, like, such a slim marketing budget. If you're going to give me a chance to absolutely, I want to have a radio show. We'll call it The Lazy Environmentalist, and I'll go out and find all those folks in industry who are doing interesting stuff. A lot of them I know already through my company, but we'll just have this really interesting conversation about how this is developing. And it was developing, and I can't explain why, except in the early 2000s, Al Gore's movie came out in 2006, An Inconvenient Truth. But before that, you had all of these people in there, I would say, or at least what I was seeing, folks in their late 20s, early 30s, designers, craftspeople, some business people who had apprenticed enough or gotten enough experience where they were dangerous, but were deciding that they didn't want to do things the way things, they'd been done in the past, and that their values were increasingly about the environment. They were going to start building products for themselves and their friends. And you saw this happen from Austin to Portland to Denver to Atlanta, up in Brooklyn. I mean, Kansas City, everywhere. Wow. And it was incredibly exciting. And I still to this day, haven't figured out why. But those became my guests. And within a year, the show moved to Sirius Satellite Radio once a week. A year after that, it was live every day. And became a TV show that I ended up hosting, and books I wrote, and went on the Martha Stewart Show for Earth Day, and had like this incredible experience that I could never have anticipated. There you go.
What a thrill ride. How many years did, in some form or another, did the Lazy Environmentalist in that incarnation exist?
In that incarnation, it was like a rocket ship 5 years, where it went from like a blog entry to an award-winning TV show on Sundance Channel.
Wow. And this is like, I feel like you might have been, 5 years ahead of Instagram. Like, there's a chance that if this happened in a different sequence, you'd have 1 million Instagram followers from, like the Lazy Environmentalist TV show. Like I my wife and I have been watching these like home makeover shows, and I'm like, how do these people get the show? Like, and then you look at their Instagram, it's 26 million people follow. I'm like, is that because of TLC, or is it like, did they have 1 million and then TLC paid for it, and then now all of a sudden there are 26 million? And so, before influencers were a thing, though they existed. Certainly, it seems that you were the environmentalist, the green space product influencer, perhaps, like the media personality.
One of not a large group, I would say. I mean,
Wow.
of course, some other really, really awesome, talented folks, and a number of them actually ended up having TV shows. We were sort of stacked one after the other on Sundance Channel for a while, which was a really great place to be. But for me, what I wanted and the reason why I pursued it was because, again, I mentioned like I was bootstrapping this business that is a huge passion of mine around design and sustainability. And so, but the opportunities were coming in media, and I just thought, I'm going to try to build this company like a Richard Branson model, right? Like a Virgin who will like jump out of an airplane or do these crazy stunts or whatever he could do himself to get attention, which would then kind of be transferred onto his company.
And were products moving when the bigger you got, the bigger the show got, the bigger the media arm got, were you selling product?
It didn't. We grew Vivavi. So my first company was called Vivavi, like Viva V, live life. So it was Vivavi.com. And we grew. We ended up having a couple of showrooms in New York City. One actually was my apartment that I lived in because was like, I will like literally live in this business 24/7. That was how I opened my first showroom because I couldn't afford rent and an apartment. So I just made them the same thing. But we ended up opening another one in Lower Manhattan. But that synergy wasn't probably as tight as I would have hoped it would have been. It was really like the Lazy Environmentalist was just moving on its own trajectory. And I spent 4 years, like kind of like you said, I was the national spokesperson for Brita. They had created this campaign called Filter for Good. You take a Brita water pitcher, you had like an Nalgene reusable bottle. And so I would, I did a lot of TV and radio, stuff for that, which was always interesting because I was usually, like sent off to places where they really didn't want to hear from an environmentalist, which is a lot of what I enjoy. And I can remember being on this radio show like in I think it was in Knoxville, and I can hear the hosts is like a morning show, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to break," and in the break they're like, "What's coming on next, Bobby?" And he's like, "Oh man, we got this environmentalist from New York coming on, And I, of course, can hear all this. And so they're like, okay, we're back. And Josh Dorfman, the lazy environmentalist, you're not here to make us feel bad, are you, Josh? And I loved those moments because I, just started talking to them about college football because I loved college football. And I was like, oh, man, UT had a tough year, but I can't remember their strong safety, but he was a first round draft pick. And so I'm just like chatting them up around college football. And then they're like, oh, yeah, you're here to talk to us like you're an environmental. What do you got for us, Josh? And so by that point, like we were good, was down right? A little bit, yeah. Yeah. So we're like, we're good. It happened once. I'll just tell you, I was with so through Brita, I went on to this show with this on Fox News with this host, Dr. Manny, who's like their doctor. And it's like Get Healthy with Dr. Manny. And this was in New York. This was in the New York City studio. And I've got like my props on a table, like a Brita pitcher and these other things, how to get healthy and go green. And I'm sitting there and it's nerve wracking for me. I mean, it's still like, I have an MBA, I'm a startup guy, and yet I'm like doing the stuff, and it's not like by nature what I'm, kind of wired to do. And so I'm waiting. And finally, Dr. Manny comes out, he's makeup on, sits down across from me, and they're like, okay, 60 seconds to live or air or whatever. And he leans over and he doesn't say hello. He just says, just so you know, I don't believe in global warming. Right? Oh, God. and I was like, like
don't let this throw you off. But
yeah. And he kind of leans back. I'm like, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to say? So I don't know how it came out, but the only thing I could think to say, since we were in New York, I was like, do you believe in the Yankees? And he was just like, thought about it, like put his head down, and like finally, like they're like 10 seconds, he lifted his head up. He's like, I do. I believe in the Yankees. And I was like, all right, well, we've got some common ground here. And it was fine. But that was part of the challenge that I've always loved, is like really trying to relate and get people to kind of buy into something or become a little more supportive of an environmental cause that might not be their predisposition before I show up.
Wow. Seems like a master class in I'll say bridge building or some sort of like hostage negotiating where the idea is a hostage, and wow, there's something I'm going to call that like, well, I mean, common ground. There has to be some sort of already a phrase for it, but it reminds me of, they said Ben Franklin used to do a thing where if someone clearly didn't like him, he would ask a favor of them, like to borrow a book. Like, oh, I know that you have this like incredible library. There's a book that you have that I've not been able to find anywhere else. Can I borrow this book? And like he had already read the book. Like he found the book. He has the book. It's in his library. But he asked this request, and the person says, "Yeah, sure." And so lets a week go by. Goes back, hands the book back. Thank you so much. That was so generous. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Wonderful book. And now this other guy's like, Ben Franklin's pretty cool. Like I like him. He's what a guy. And so there's some sort of like Jedi mind trick maneuver there that ties you to Ben Franklin in my mind.
Yeah. Oh, that's a beautiful relationship. So I appreciate that.
So you navigate this world where you're thrust into a media personality type role. You're a spokesperson. You have a television show. You all these things. At some point, if I'm trying to pay attention to the dates, it's got to be around 2010, and that's, I don't know, maybe 4 years before you moved to Asheville, making up the timeline. What happens then? Do you pull back? You're like, I'm enough with the traveling, enough with the radio shows. What happens next?
Yeah, well, we did 2 seasons of this TV show. So just to kind of put the moment in context, we'd gone through the financial recession in 2008. Mm-hmm. That hit our furniture business incredibly hard. I mentioned this. We opened a second showroom kind of retail space. It was actually in Lower Manhattan, this building called the River House, which was like one of these first luxury green condo buildings. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're brilliant. Like, here's people who are in a green condo. They want to do this. All our furniture's here. And it was great. I mean, it was a really, really, it was a smart marketing move to get in there. And I had a really good marketing director, this guy, Aaron Kresner at the time, who made it happen. We had like Leonardo DiCaprio come into our showroom and, with his mom who does shopping for him, buys his furniture. So, like there's that. But once the recession hit, a lot of our pipeline dried up. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up shutting Vivavi and focusing more on Lazy Environmentalist. And then after 2 seasons of that TV show, the moment had shifted. Like green media, like at that point, had really saturated so much of the media landscape, or whether, from magazines to TV. And so certainly at that, I think producers probably had the most quote unquote green fatigue.
Yeah,
they were
just going to use that word if that wasn't a thing. It seems like Zoom fatigue, green fatigue a decade ago.
Green fatigue, yeah. And so I would, I went and pitched a few other ideas. I had access at that point to go talk to some other networks, but the moment had clearly shifted, mm-hmm. and the storytelling around sustainability and the environment kind of it receded. I felt, and I got some advice from some friends in kind of the sustainability industry, that I wanted to go back into the startup world. Mm-hmm. And one of I honestly, I was burned out from an entrepreneurial point of view. Mm-hmm. I was just burned out. I mean, I had lost, I was running 2 businesses at the same time, a media company and a furniture products company. And I was tired. I mean, I just didn't have ideas for what I wanted to build next. And someone said, hey, go work for a startup, take your skills there and learn, and then see. So that's when I went out to San Francisco and ran marketing for a startup called Good Guide, which was fascinating in its own right. It was a Fast Company 50 startup, a TechCrunch 50 startup. But it was a team of scientists from UC Berkeley, so really nerdy, who were trying to drive this notion of radical transparency in consumer products, that you would be able to go to a store or go anywhere and understand everything in this product that you are buying, because ingredients are like a foreign language, right? And so on its health, environment, and ethical performance, and so they were pulling in all this data to figure this out, and it was really cool. And I came in to be kind of a translator in a sense, to kind of
seems like it would be important.
yeah, how are we going to brand this company and take all this awesome data, which was packaged well? You had an app with a bar that would scan a barcode, and you could get a score and compare like your band roll-on to your right guard, and like it was cool. But yet it wasn't. We still had to think about how do you take all this data and what we're doing and make it like interesting to people, and then like valuable to people, and then actionable. So I'm actually going to do something, right? And what was cool was we started thinking, and the founders also was awesome. This guy, Dara O'Rourke, who's, again, this UC Berkeley professor. He's doing a lot of work today there and at Amazon on their sustainability efforts. Dara, we'd create these videos where we thought, man, what if we had these counterintuitives, like these things that people don't know about their products that could be less sort of interesting and compelling. And so we would make these videos of like Dara, like this professor sitting at his desk, and all he would have in front of him was like a can of Coke and like a carton of Dannon yogurt. And he'd sit there and we'd kind of pour him out, and he'd be talking, and and his point was like, which one has more? Here's Dannon yogurt, the health food. Here's Coca-Cola, like this like sugar water that's unhealthy. Yeah. And like you're sort of seeing the stuff like kind of cascading across his desk, and his whole point was eventually like, but the yogurt has more sugar in it than the Coca-Cola, right? Like, and so we were like, if we can come up with these little counterintuitives and like kind of create these sort of like viral videos, maybe we can bring this thing to life. And what was funny was, we were backed by some really good venture capital firms like NEA, Dripper Fisher Jurvensen. And one of them invited. He was like, Josh, you will come and like present to like our VC community and our limited partners on what you're doing on marketing on Facebook and what tech you're using on like Facebook and in social media, right? So this is now 10 years ago, right? And I've got two other heads of marketing from our portfolio companies. It's like, you three, I want you to present and like, in 2 days. So I show up, I'm on this dais, and these like two marketers go first. I know them, they're talented, and they're like, well, we're using this like tech thing to like grab emails, and it's like a giveaway and this thing, and we've got this plugin and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, okay, Josh, your turn, and basically I'm like, yeah, we've got this video camera, and like we're making like kind of funny, quirky videos that we think are shareable and like are, and like the room is like dead silent, and I'm like, oh God, this, I don't know what my future looks like here. But this other guy who I didn't know, sort of shame on me, maybe, who like the room certainly knew, who I guess was like the guest of honor on this panel, was this guy, Andrew Bosworth, who's like Boz, like the VP of engineering at Facebook and has been there forever. Like, so they invited Boz, and like the room's totally silent. You sort of hear some shifting the seats, and he's like looking at me, and he's like, that's exactly how you should be using our platform, which you would get as a marketer, right? And it's not, he's like, it's not about bells and whistles and gimmicks. It's about that human connectivity and story. And so, then
especially then when they were in early 2000s or 2010 even, they were doing everything to multiply and magnify things that were already working, as opposed to, I mean, there's still that today, but there's more of, you do kind of need to know the X's and O's of an algorithm and have some sort of sophistication, or it behooves you to understand the analytics and the numbers, and the content is also important. But if you're looking for virality in content, Facebook is not the platform anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely shifted, but it was very different then, like you're saying, right?
Oh my goodness,
if you could get shareable content, and so it was just, it was like, I guess that was an approach kind of born out of like the lazy environmentalist and storytelling, and and trying to really find that connection. Yeah.
And I love that. And so your tale brings you to San Francisco. I believe at some point you find your way to Summit, New Jersey, which is a stone's throw from where I grew up. So how did you get from the West Coast back east?
So while I was at Good Guide, this also just, it was a great opportunity. Amazon had actually bought a company best known for its biggest website, Diaperscom. Yeah, I don't know if and so Diaperscom, delivering everything but the baby, grew incredibly fast. The company behind it launched another e-commerce business, Soap.com, like a kind of a CVS type product offering. These businesses were growing really fast, and Amazon ended up buying them for a lot of money. And the founders of Diaperscom realized like they had this sort of rocket ship business. So it certainly did well from an investor kind of venture capital success story. From a retail story, they realized they were missing out on some potential because you've got all these moms coming to Diapers.com to buy, everything for their baby and then young child. But once a kid's 3 years old, you're not really shopping on Diapers.com anymore, right? And a lot of these customers were buying seventh generation, Burt's Bees, these kind of natural organic brands. And so I was recruited to come in and build what we thought would, what at the time was the largest kind of natural and organics e-commerce site in existence. Wow. Where we thought if we can then kind of capture these moms as their childs are aging into these, aspirational products and natural organic products, then we can extend their lifetime value as customers, and we can create a really wonderful business. So that's what I went back to New York to work on and build. And it was a really cool opportunity, kind of ground floor, to like set the brand vision and strategy, build the merchandising team, the marketing team, and bring that business to market. So yeah, I spent a couple of years working on that. We called it, it was called Vine.com.
Ah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think I've watched an interview with the one of the founders of Diapers. If I'm not mistaken, that was largely just like an arbitrage play initially, where they would go to like BJ's and they'd go to like Sam's Clubs and legitimately just like buy a pallet of diapers retail and then put them on the internet and ship them across the country, to the point where they stopped unloading diapers at some of these places in like the tri-state area of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, to they just left them out, and these guys would just take their forklift and buy, and they're like, you have to stop buying. And then they went direct to Johnson & Johnson or whatever.
So that would, if you're talking about arbitrage, that would have been Mark Laurie, who was one of the co-founders, who ended up then launching Jet.com, which was bought by Walmart, and he spent a number of years as Walmart's head of U.S. e-commerce. And fascinating guy, because he always speaks. That's very much how he would speak in terms of the language of arbitrage. But I think also, and that's been written about a ton.
And just in case, arbitrage is the idea that not everything is valued equally in all places. And so if you have a thing that is $1 at Walmart and $3 online, theoretically there's a way to make money by buying it from Walmart, selling it online.
Yeah, but it was also a way to test the market, because Pampers was not willing to sell Pampers to two guys in a garage with a business called 1-800-Diapers or whatever it was, right? And so, yeah, you had to kind of test the market, prove a lot of things before you're going to get those relationships. But that is very much, sounds like Mark to talk about how are we going to arbitrage this. And because I think his original business, or one of them, was baseball cards, which is all about arbitrage.
Oh my goodness! And you want to talk about a product or a space that has gone off the charts in 2020 and early 2021. Baseball cards are crazy town in terms of a commodity value. Yeah. From 2019 to 2021, it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I've heard like Gary V talking about it.
And the issue, love and hate. I love Gary V, but the thing that I think is often missed is that someone like a Gary V can move the market, and so
Hank Aaron's,
and so if he's hitting that platform, or TikTok, businesses go to TikTok. He's also selling the enterprise agency solution for bringing your brand to TikTok. So it is self-fulfilling, because he can move a market. He can make TikTok real. He can, not alone, but close. And now it's happening with Clubhouse, where people who can create the market also have a little bit of skin in the game. And so when he says, baseball cards, Pokemon cards, it's largely because 2 years ago he started really buying them, and now he's making a ton of money as the market goes up. And I love it. And I also am envious. And I also, don't think everyone should. There's other ways to differentiate, or I'd say get your diversify your assets.
Yeah, well, I would say, where were you 25 years ago, Gary V, when we were stocking up on Cal Daniels rookie cards and Eric Davis rookie cards and all these guys who turned, into nothing, right? Like me and my brother have these binders still of like.
Do you still have them? I mean, if you go back through those binders, look out. I mean, you might be worth looking at, like getting an 18-year-old kid to intern and start posting those on eBay. It is crazy. And right, some are absolute duds, but 25 years ago, more, because he was doing it in his teens, he was selling baseball cards. Like that's what he did before he worked in his dad's wine shop, is that he sold baseball cards, and that's why he's coming back to it so aggressively. But that's a different interview for a different day.
Interview, yeah.
So arbitrage, I think that there are a couple themes that I'm pulling through this winding tale. One,
by the way, I could, sorry to interrupt, but I do have an arbitrage tale.
So please, and what I'm gonna ask for is, and this seems like it could be it. What are some of these like the primary lessons that you can pull from your own story before Asheville? And if arbitrage is one of them, let's hear an arbitrage.
No. Well, if that's the question, then I shouldn't tell you my arbitrage story.
Boy, I can't not tell the arbitrage story. Go to the arbitrage story.
Okay. So the arbitrage story is, when I finished business school in 2000, I went out to LA and I caught the tail end, mostly I would say not the dot-com boom, but the bust. I went to work for a startup that busted relatively soon after I got out there. And I was thinking, like, what am I going to do now? And probably one of the things that's come through is that I was driven for so much of my life by passion. And passion probably more like certainly by heart than the head in how I would make decisions. And so I decided, with my MBA and with all of my debt that I'd accumulated going to graduate school, that I was going to be a screenwriter.
That's logic right there.
Totally makes sense, right? And so as it happened, I was living in Santa Monica, and the two most prevalent sort of sort of professionals in LA that like you'll meet in a coffee shop, not in like an office, but in a coffee shop, are like a screenwriter and a fitness guru. And it turned out, right? Or actor. Yeah. Like those three. Yeah. So like there's lots of, aspiring, failed, fitness gurus, screenwriters, actors. And so the guy who lived next to me was a fitness guru. And so we started doing some fitness equipment arbitrage, which basically meant like he recruited me because he was a good fitness guru and salesperson, that like, he's like, look, like you go out and buy up all like the Chuck Norris, like fitness equipment and the Soloflex and Bowflex.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Bowflex, by the way, they retain their value better than BMWs, because I had so many in my apartment. And I even had like a universal gym in my kitchen. And here I've got my little computer, and it's arbitrage because I'm buying it up cheap in the valley outside of LA, and like putting it on eBay and trying to like flip it and support myself while I'm like, trying to write screenplays. And neither of those worked out particularly well. But I was on the receiving end from my friends from business school who'd gone to Citibank and elsewhere, and there's like a corporate intervention, where they're like, dude, there is a place for you in the corporate world. Like, you don't need to like have a universal gym in your kitchen. Like, you can like come back. And I was like, you do not understand the future. You are missing out. And so what are the takeaways and lessons that I can offer here?
So I look forward to it, because what I'm hearing is you've had lean seasons in your career, and I think that probably makes for a perspective that will allow you to season or weather any entrepreneurial storm. You remember what it was like to have the Bowflex in your kitchen while you worked on a passion project. I think that you've also seen what it is to build a business that kind of perhaps follows the flow and just goes with it and figures it out and seizes opportunity. And you've seen other people that built things perhaps very intentionally to sell or very intentionally to raise venture capital and see like explosive growth. And I'm wondering, I'll leave it to you, what all resonated, what stuck with you that you couldn't let go of as you moved down to the mountains of North Carolina?
Well, I appreciate what you just said. I take that to heart. I think the piece that's kind of the theme that sort of has moved through all of those adventures, ventures, misadventures, is doing things that I do truly believe in that align with my personal values. And as long as I feel like it aligns with my personal values, I'm willing to try just about anything and any kind of role. And when I came down here and started working on Venture Asheville, which was not my intention, but I kind of connected with the folks at our economic development organization and our Chamber of Commerce, and kind of agreed that would be it'd be a good role and that I could bring value to it. I thought that, man, to be in a role where I can help others pursue their entrepreneurial, dreams, passions, help this city thrive. Those are all things that align with my values. And that's probably the thing I'm most in tune with is, does this resonate with me at my core? And if so, and as I've gotten, more seasoned, let's say, I'm able to make hopefully smarter decisions about saying, does it resonate with my core? And do I think that this is a viable opportunity to go after? Right. And so that's probably the learning, to sum it up. But certainly I've always been someone that's done things, whether they look crazy or not, that are where my passion is and where my values lie.
Heard. With passion, I'm going to leave that alone, because I think that passion is, I'll call it, it's a hard word. I think that when you tell a 18-year-old, follow your passion, that is often bad advice. You don't have passion. Passion is not there yet. Passion is like born of effort, typically. So I'm going to leave passion alone from this conversation and point to something you mentioned, which I hadn't heard yet, is it a viable opportunity, is how I'm remembering you saying it. How, after all of the adventures, ventures, and misadventures, after all of it, how do you today assess opportunity?
Well, gosh, that's a great question.
Because I imagine a mind like yours, with experiences like you've had, has been able to say, this could be a thing, or someone might have come to you, this could be a thing, and somehow or another, you're on Simbly, and it seems like you are, at least from where I'm standing, largely focused on Simbly. So why did it start with 100% I'm all in on this? Did you test in a small way? What? And I'm doing this to buy a little bit of time, but how are you assessing opportunity, and how did that calculation or energy pull you towards saying, this is going to be my thing and I'm going to leave Venture Asheville, if that's even how it went?
Yeah, it's not exactly how it went, which is fine. But I think to your question, it's being certainly more seasoned about being able to look at a market and market behavior, spending more time doing market research. Some of the testing we did was in, if we were testing Google AdWords or running some ads just to see what folks were responding to. This go around, I would talk much more broadly with folks in industry to get a sense of where the market is, than I did the first time I started a furniture company, which again was like this has to happen. The world needs this. I'm going to do this.
Mm.
So I think it's, it's just, it's taking the time to really do the research. But it's also, I still, I'm focused on Simply. We're trying to grow this business. I've had some other opportunities, start to come up, whether it's around consulting or looking at other kinds of ventures where there may be a good fit. And, like I think about, so I'm sort of in this hybrid role where we're trying to build Simply, but I don't feel like I've gotten into a place where I can raise money for that business because I still don't feel like we've really figured out enough about our marketing model. How much can we spend to feel pretty confident we're going to get a customer, and how much will that customer buy over time? We're not there yet.
To me, that is what I've learned. That is foundational when you are looking to raise true capital. Like when you are looking to raise institutional investments or like proper venture capitalist money, not just, mom and dad chipping in, uncles, aunts, friends giving you, $10,000. When you're doing a funding round, the question is, what does this money create? Will it make your business grow? Show me how. And often it's for every $100 in ads, we know that we create $101 of revenue. If yes, give me all your money and we'll turn it into all, and that's oversimplified, but I think that you're right based on what I've seen in my small, short stint in startups and venture.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so that can be, the only way to figure that out is to test different marketing channels, right? And sometimes you find a channel that you think is good, but it's too small. You can't put enough money into it, right? And to make that a very clear sort of micro example, we have some blogs that we work with where we get a lot of exposure, but for that specific blog, I can't scale beyond where it is, right? So it's like you think you're onto it, you're like, oh, it's blogs, right? But then we try with others, and it's not as successful. So it is a lengthy process. Having run an angel investor group and worked on the investment side, I know like how challenging it can be to raise money in the first place, and how much easier it can be if that story is locked in place where you're going to investors and saying, I'm not asking for your investment dollars to learn. I've already learned. I'm asking for your investment dollars so I can scale this thing. And all of your investment dollars are going into that rocket ship that we now know how to build. And we're not there yet, and that's okay, because it can take a lot of time to figure out. And I feel good about the steps we're taking. So, even in that, like, I'm not as headlong into this business perhaps as I would have been, 10, 15 years ago, because it's just not a process. It's a methodical process I'm trying to work. And so, just to maybe answering your question, stepping back, and maybe this is interesting to some of your listeners. So I've talked, like I said, I've talked to some companies about consulting. I've even talked to some companies about stepping back into into some full-time roles. And when I'm looking at those kinds of companies and going through an interview process, I might get really excited about the product, but then it's really being more mindful of, what is this interview process like for me? And not just like, am I building rapport with the people I'm interviewing with, but do I like the way they're communicating with me, right? Like, do we have communication, then it drops off, and then there's communication one day, and then it's rushed, and then it's like, because there's something culturally happening inside that company that's influencing that process, right? And so there's just a lot more to examine to say, do I think this company has a culture in place that I want to be part of? And then I think when you're looking, like, so this is how I'm talking about opportunity. When I'm talking to some of these companies and they're saying, okay, this is the role, it's asking questions like, great, some things are obvious, but like, we don't always think to ask them, how are you going to measure success? right? How will I know if I'm succeeding in this role, right? Or here's this description of what you're telling me this job is, but yet I'm talking to you and you're telling me these are the things that matter, but this is the description. And so do these things actually matter? What am I going to be evaluated on, right? And then what's the most challenging thing for this role to succeed, right? And or like what's the most challenging things for your company? Like what's right? Just really trying to get a more holistic picture of, is the culture right? Is the opportunity right? All of those things are going to matter for someone's success. And so, you could probably apply those things similarly to like my own business as an entrepreneur and ask a similar set of questions.
Yeah.
But I think it's really a mindset of it's not just, this is what investors do, right? And so it's like, but this is, I think we often discount these things when we're going after something that's bright and shiny. We don't ask what if this isn't working out perfectly questions, right? Or like, is this person going to be a good boss? Or is this investor going to be someone I actually want to get married to because I'm going to be talking to this man or woman for like the next 10 years, right? And so it's having a sort of a wider aperture when you're examining any kind of opportunity, and not just letting like the passion for it have you running headlong into things.
Wow. I think that's beautiful. And I can draw the parallel to assessing just a market opportunity versus a role in a business. And one of the questions that's coming up that's adjacent is, you've now been in media, or this might be oversimplified, but you've been in media, you've been in retail, you've been in venture-backed, high growth, high expectations business, and you've been now in production manufacturing. Of I'm seeing 4 fingers after I count that out. Of those 4, does production and manufacturing give you the most, I don't want to say warm fuzzies and excitement right now? Or is that just like a space that you hadn't touched yet and you wanted to know what it felt like to run a product business?
Dude, are you like in my brain? This is that is such a good question. And I'm not sure exactly where I come out on it yet, because I definitely wanted to do it. I definitely wanted to be able to kind of check a box that says I have made my own product, right? Like, I've been a retailer. I really want to make my own product. I think what I've learned as I'm talking about trying to find, not only that product market fit, to use some of the sort of parlance of the startup world, but trying to build that scalable business model. When I started thinking about this 3 or 4 years ago, it seemed to me we may have talked about this when we had coffee, but it seemed to me the moment was so ripe and opportune for having your own product in market. We saw like American Giant and like just having one sweatshirt, right? And how like that business went crazy just selling a sweatshirt. And because there were so many ways to and affordable channels to get that word out, and you could go to Kickstarter and go from there. But 3 or 4 years later, it's a different landscape. So many of these channels are saturated, not by furniture companies, but by product companies who still have the attention of the editors that I might want to pitch a story to, right? Or kind of marketing opportunity that we might want to go after. So it's still a great time to have your own product. It's just gotten so much more challenging and requires, I wouldn't even say more sophistication. I would just say more like kind of what I talked about, just that testing approach, but also really making sure that you've done your research up front, that to feel so confident in the product that you're coming to market with. With all that said, I don't know, so I don't know if it's like, well, okay, I feel like I've done it. I guess one thing I would say, having worked in tech, is that I am still drawn to product and to companies that are actually making material objects.
Yeah.
It's just I'm less excited about software than I am about like material objects.
Sure. I what your response has made me think of a couple things. One is the folks. Well, so before I say them, I think that you're absolutely right in saying that there's something busier now than ever before in product specifically. I think that production has been like democratized in a meaningful way where I can, drop ship and on-demand print about any t-shirt design that you could possibly want and theoretically start a Shopify site tomorrow. I've done it and sell a thing tomorrow, and your business is live. You have a business. Congrats. And what that allows for is that people who are very good marketers or advertisers, perhaps the better term, because they can identify a target audience, run ads, have a funnel, and convert meaningfully with repetition. So then you have these like ad first businesses that are maybe good, hard to say, hard to know where their ethics are. They're just really good at getting in front of a target audience and having the first 2 seconds of the video be shocking, or the frozen screen before the video starts have something salacious, which makes me think of just literally the day that the pandemic started. I was at a marketing event in Asheville, and this guy Benton Crane is one of the, I think he's the CEO of the ad company, marketing company, agency, creative business that has done all of the most incredible ads of products that you know and love. Poopery, Purple, mattress, and these are millions or hundreds of millions of plays on YouTube videos, and the products also happen to absolutely destroy. And my biggest takeaway from his keynote was the idea that if you're in products, and he argued any business, the very first objective is to understand if there is a viable economic engine that you can build on and improve on by improving on your product and improving on your branding and your look and feel. But like, if the answer is no, do not continue. Like, don't let your passion lead you into a sandpit. Build the unit economics as early as you possibly can. And that flies in the face of how I have historically always thought about a business, which is have a thing that you love, tell the story meaningfully, find your tribe, build a tribe, and you'll always be supported. And this guy's like, run the ads day one. Run the ads day one. Ugly, however, but you need to know if you can get cold traffic to convert. And it seems that your background, your history, your experience is putting you somewhere smack dab in the middle where you also understand how important building that economic engine is. I'm wondering, are you in a place now where if you don't fully understand how to scale your customer base with cold traffic and ads, you don't necessarily need or want venture backing? Is that something that you're like hungry for? Or is that something that would be, the language I've heard is the best time to stop for gas is when you don't need it. Like, you become, you'd pay for $5 a gallon if you're running on empty.
Yeah. For us, we are, we want, we're in business to build a successful business. I can modulate how much we're spending. I can modulate, we would be going faster. We would have more product in market. That's the one part where the pandemic has slowed us down. And so, I think you could find a lot of of course you can find a million kind of counters to that notion, right? Like, sure. I was just reading an interview with a woman one of the co-founders of Health Aid Kombucha, right? And she would probably tell you a very different story about how they've persevered and found their tribe and you know built a really nice business. For us, I think it's what I said too. Like, no, I don't even honestly know if I actually would want to raise investment money for this business. I'm not sure that it's actually an appropriate business for venture capital. I mean, it just doesn't necessarily, scale as quickly as the investor community would want.
Sure.
And it's not necessarily like that's the only financing that we could go get. And certainly I've been approached about other, forms of financing, financing our inventory, financing, even like our marketing components. I'm just not looking to take on capital until, well, let me put it this way. On the one hand, yeah, I'm rushing to build this business, but on the other hand, all my eggs aren't in the basket of this business, right? So I'm not going to make decisions that I feel like are going to take on more risk than the business requires. The other thing I would say, and I think my business partner, Christopher, who's our designer, would agree with me, is that there's just tons of satisfaction about getting something really awesome into the market. And I don't think either of us feels like we've hit it on hit the home run yet, just in terms of the product. We have huge fans of our product. We get reviews like, this is artwork, this is functional art. We love that. But we also feel like, there's potentially a better material story to tell, like, innovation around eco-friendly materials. There's, potentially a better design story to tell. So, our kind of inspiration and motivation is multifaceted, right? We still want to create these beautifully designed objects embedded with sustainability so that it's a no sacrifice product for customers. And I think we still feel that we can even get that more right, more perfect, more ideal, that it's almost like that we can create viral products because of the product itself. I think that's also like a North Star for us, at least from a design philosophy. And so, we're going to keep doing that. And if we're not taking on other people's capital, we can afford to do it, right? We can afford to do it.
Yeah. And I ask that largely because I'm in a season in my life where I'm very not interested in like a venture-backed high growth experience right now. I think there may come a time and a place. And I was wondering what season you're in and what you're hungry for, because some people just love it, and there are, to your point, many ways to bring capital into a business, and it doesn't need to be with equity financing. It can be debt. It can be a whole bunch of other vehicles. So that's helpful for me to get a sense of your world. I'm wondering, when you think of the year ahead, 2021 for Simbly, what I think we learned in 2020 that goals are as meaningful as the exercise of setting a goal is, and then you can probably throw the rest of it out. But what are some of the goals? What are the things you're thinking about in 2021?
We're thinking about how quickly can we build our product roadmap. We have, just based on our initial sort of aesthetic, we have more tables coming for the home. We have coffee tables. We have kitchen tables. We've got some really cool stuff coming that's been in the pipeline for a while. We have been talking to suppliers about moving into outdoor furniture and taking recycled plastic from milk jugs and creating similarly really beautiful flat pack furniture in a similar aesthetic to what we're doing right now. We see that as a the opportunity to tell, like I said, a great material story, a great design story, and go after a bigger market, because that could be a commercial market for us too.
Wow. Yeah.
And we are now working with a new prototyper on lighting, and it's just really innovative lighting that kind of directs, I don't even know quite how to explain it, but it's like sort of directional lighting that doesn't actually, this is going to sound weird, but doesn't even necessarily like rely on the light bulb itself to direct the light. I will leave it at that, which sounds sort of like Star Trek-y.
Yeah.
But we think it could be like the designs are just so sweet. So,
Cool.
we like I said, we get super amped about the product, and we will keep testing to figure out, do we have the right product for the right customer at the right value to then go all in on the business or more in on the business.
Wow. And so that sounds exciting. I'm very excited to be a fly on the wall and watch that over the year ahead and years to come. B, Simbly, my guess was that it is a blending of simple assembly, because your products flat pack, they build in like with a little hex key, 2 seconds. There, or at least the table that we have, 2 seconds, and it was done. And I built a lot of stuff for this office. That was by orders of magnitude the simplest. Am I right, or is that just me, trying to be a meaning finder?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the name was also made in Asheville. I was working with one of our mentors at the Adventure Asheville's Elevate program. This woman, Gay Lamb, who has so she has an awesome business, and she and her partner Brian have a branding business on the side. Wow. And she came up with it. And so like she had a list, and it was like Simbly. I'm like, I like that. And she's like, it's 5 letters, and we're looking at it, and we're like, we think we might be able to get that .com.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
Which is great. Did you buy it just like off the market? Someone had it. No one had it.
I bought it. No, I bought it. I like acquired
from GoDaddy, from somebody, like somebody was squatting on Simbly.
Yeah, but it was like when we bought Vine, when I was at kind of Amazon, that was like $400,000. When I bought Simbly, it was like several $1,000s. Wow. And I was like, I can't believe that we're going to have this, this URL that aligns with, this ethos around simple assembly.
Yeah, because it seems like Simbly in year one would have like, get Simbly, build Simbly, live Simbly. You know what I mean? Yeah. That is people's workaround. Even when they come up with a great name or a something, you have to throw a .io, something. Maybe just in case. Do you have I have a pretty strong point of view on how to think about website names and domains. Do you have any meaningful tales to tell of looking around? Like one of the things, for example, my rule is that if you are thinking about buying a domain, do not Google to see if the domain exists. Go to like whois.com or whois.org, whatever it is. Whois lookup, go to GoDaddy, not GoDaddy, because sometimes GoDaddy employees will buy domains they get searched for. But like go to a domain lookup tool and look it up in the tool. Don't Google it.
Yeah, that's probably like really good advice. I've never really been burned, so but that makes sense. When we came out with Vivavi for my first furniture company, I couldn't think of a name, and I was actually my family's business is a sleepaway camp up in New Hampshire. It's called Camp Wall Whitman. My brother runs it now, and so I was up there visiting, and like I couldn't think of a name for this business, and I'm like talking to the baker. And I'm like venting how I can't think. He's like, "What are you doing? What are you up to?" And then and I'm like, "Oh, I'm trying to think." He's like, "Oh, you should talk to like I think it was his ex-wife. She's like my ex-wife. She's a linguist at BU, and she names companies for a living." And I'm like, "All right, cool." So like I talk to her and I tell her everything I'm trying to do and our values and our design and she's like, "All right, give me a few days and I'll come back and like I'll with some names." And so she comes back with like 5 names, and 4 of them were just so hideous, like Hip Cool Goods, or like Happy blah blah blah. It's just like awful. And then there was this one at the bottom, Vivavi, right? And I'm like, "Oh, what's this?" And then she's like, "Oh, it's the derivation of vivere, to live, and V is life, blah, blah, like." And I'm like, "Huh." I'm like, "I'll take it," And so she's like, "Okay." So then I like got it, and I was like, "Yeah, I do think it fits. It sort of sounds vaguely Italian, like it's like happy, But then I thought about it, I was like, I bet she puts that at the bottom of every list she gives to every customer because she can't find a sucker to like to offload it on, And she's always got like these four, she's probably like a terrible, namer, But so anyway, that's how but I lucked out. I
How
would say.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting. A friend of mine from New York, from college also though, he worked at some agency or another doing naming things specifically with cars. And I'd never thought of it before, but he's like, it's really important to have a car that every language can say, or like that would, work in most every language of the world, where like certain sounds don't work. And so you have to cut all those out. And like, we're experts at naming cars. I was like, wow.
Well, there's
You
the
don't think about
classic example of like the Chevy Nova, right? Like Nova doesn't
it. Yeah,
go,
don't
and
go.
it went to South America. I mean, it's like a classic business case on like, don't do that. Yeah.
You build an agency just like we don't allow for that to happen.
Right.
That's amazing. Okay, so 2021, big year with I guess my last in the rear view question for you is, as you think about the ecosystem in Asheville, and this will transition us towards a couple community-based questions. But as you think about like the startup ecosystem in Asheville, it might be a little too close to you because you've been at the center of it for so long. How has it evolved in the 7 years that you've been here, specifically in small business and supporting small businesses as opposed to the community at large?
I guess the first way that I would answer that question, just from, of course, from my experience, was when I stepped into that role as the director of Venture Asheville, 2014, I think, April 2014. There had been a fair amount of activity here, of course, before I got here, trying to, move that startup community along. There was an organization called Advantage West, which had done really good work, but it was starting to lose its funding. There were certain leaders that were here that had really invested a lot of time. Folks like Trevor Lorbeer, who was instrumental in starting to Meet the Geeks, which is an ongoing organization that's here. But my sense of the moment when I kind of showed up was that they were kind of a little bit tired of those roles. And there just wasn't a ton of there wasn't a ton of kind of the glue of building an ecosystem, an entrepreneurial ecosystem, is that people have to like smash into each other a lot. They have to like see each other. They have to be able to like bounce ideas off each other. They have to be able to meet investors and get to know those investors. So like when one day they might raise capital, those investors actually know who they are and have seen them evolve. And that wasn't really happening. We had like a TEDx Asheville. There had been, I think, a startup weekend. But I look at those things as like sort of like these, it's like there are sort of these tent pole events. Like you need these events, like, 4 of these hold up a tent, but you need all the other events to like fill in. And so one of the things we started really quickly was 1 million cups of coffee, Asheville. And so I had read about it actually before I moved to Asheville, this event where once a week entrepreneurs get up and present their business to a supportive room of people who are there just to, frankly, be supportive and kind of connect with each other. Because I felt like we need some weekly interaction that's going to happen, in this case, every single week. And we need to figure out more of these collisions. It's probably a better way to say it than like smashing into each other. Like we need more, right? And so what's changed is that with 1 million cups of coffee, with the things that happen at Hatch, with all of the programming that's scaled around Mountain BizWorks, with organizations that I will fail to mention here that I'll be remiss about, there are so many more people volunteering their time, stepping up as leaders, organizations stepping in than there were 7 years ago. And that to me is that, almost in its own right, that's the success story, because a startup community and this is not an original idea. This guy, Brad Feld, who you may know of, who actually wrote the book Startup Communities based on a lot of experience out in Boulder, has emphasized, as have others, that a startup community really needs to be built by the people in the startup community. Like if it's ultimately being built just by like a director at Venture Asheville in a kind of a top-down way, the question really is how sustainable is that if that role goes away, as opposed to help. So we intentionally spent a lot of time trying to kind of seed things. Sort of, we put I worked on bringing back Startup Weekend as one of the, within my first year or two in that role, but I didn't run it. I brought folks together who had the interest and got them together to lead it. Guys like Chad Slagle, who has a really cool like whiskey business now here in town.
Wow.
But that was really important to me, was to see other people step up and have opportunities to evolve into leadership roles. And that, I think, is what's most heartening to me, that we have something that's going to continue to grow and thrive.
Love that. For the opposite side, what do you see after about almost a decade, 7 years? What's missing specifically in that portion of the community in Asheville, startup, small business, entrepreneurship at large? What do you think is missing?
Well, again, it's like you said initially, you're going to separate out startups from small business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I think it depends. If you're asking what's missing, and I'm shifting here a little bit, the question is, what's the goal, right? Like, so if the goal is to have a thriving local business community, that's diverse, that's, inclusive, I think we're of course, no community is perfect, but I think you see a lot of great progress in that regard happening in Asheville. I think there's for small businesses, I think there's relatively good, access to capital. Of course, entrepreneurs will always say they can't get capital, but I do, like we're talking about today, I do think businesses that are primed for capital and have done a lot of the grunt work can get, usually can get capital. And even startups, high growth things that say they can't raise money, I tend to think it's not the investor community's fault that they can't raise money, but that's a philosophical thing. I think on the, on the cultural side, one thing that's great about Asheville, and one thing you really need to build startups, is like, you actually want a culture that is weird. Like, that's good. That like Asheville, is like a weird place, because there's a book called The Rainforest. I forget the authors, but they're also VCs out in San Francisco and help communities grow. I think one of them lives here in Western North Carolina.
Wow.
Vincent Chu, maybe. I can't think of his last name. But one of the premises of that book is like to like sort of quote like do startups. Like doing startups, building startups, like is not like industrial agriculture. You can't just like lay perfectly like, straight rows and like expect like the startups to be like the crops and just like spring up, because like the crops are actually, like the startups that actually succeed are like the weeds, like the weird looking things that you can't identify, right? Like that's actually like the thing that might be a huge startup. It will never be the thing that's just like easy to understand in a row, like identifiable right away, because that's not disruptive. That's not right. And so it's like a totally different approach to the culture you need in place. Like you need a rainforest, not like an industrial agriculture farm. And Asheville has that. The thing that I've wondered about, and I don't know if it's changed because I've been, somewhat removed, focused on my own ventures, is that, coming from like New York and San Francisco and LA, and just being raised in New York, I think the thing that frustrated me the most was like just generally sort of the pace that this city moves at. Now that could be just a Southern thing, or that could be an Asheville thing, but I would talk to entrepreneurs, and I get it, who were like saying like, no, I'm building this high growth startup. You got to help me raise money. And I'm, and they're like, but it's like Wednesday and that's like my mountain biking day, and it's like, okay, man, I'm happy for you to have a mountain biking day. That's a dream for so many people, but that might be in conflict with some of your other goals for your startup. Right. And so I think, I don't know. I don't know if that should change for Asheville. I don't know if it's like, but I do think there's a disconnect between striving to build like super high growth startups that could, exit for $100 million and up, and that like culture that we have here, which might be getting in the way of that.
And I think that's fair. One of the things that even, we're in our 80s of episodes at this point, and I am looking for folks around who are trying to grow hundreds of $1 million businesses. I know that they're here. I've met a couple, but like, I think most of the people that we're talking to are, building 6-figure businesses and might build 7-figure business. But one of the things that I want to, respect our time, but like one of the things that I want to say envious of perhaps is the proximity with which at certain points in your career, you worked closely with people who seemed to just like think about $100 million opportunities or $1 billion opportunities, and just how proximity to people who think in that way, you don't need to then try for the same, target, but it's how does that not change your perspective? It has to. And so I believe firmly in the, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I am, excited about who we get to spend, Sarah and I, my wife, get to spend time with in Asheville. It's made us better. It's made our business grow faster. It's made our visions for what's possible and like the lifestyle plus the success financially that you could have. But when I was in New York, I was a lot closer to people who were trying to be billionaires and hundreds of millionaires than, or at least be a part of businesses that were looking to be 100 millionaires and own some percentage of that when they exit. And I'm eager to meet some people who are working on like generational wealth projects, life-changing for everyone who's in the company projects. And that's one of the things that I don't think Asheville necessarily needs more businesses like that, but that's something that I wouldn't mind being adjacent to, if only to, I don't know, draft off of that kind of energy and just observe. Is that soul crushing or is it exciting? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great point. And that's again why I think it goes back to what's the goal. And at Venture Asheville, and then when I went to the Collider to lead the Collider, we were thinking, can we build these high growth engines, these high growth startups, because you can accelerate potentially job growth, but also wealth creation, yeah. Right? And you certainly, I still feel like for Asheville, you need that component as part of a healthy, diversified economy. I think that there are some structural challenges that make it challenging. Structural challenges, of course, that make it challenging. But one, like, we don't have a research university here. Now, I've had this debate with folks in the roles I've had in Asheville where they've said, well, we have this, It's like, we don't have a research university. We don't have patents being created here. It's very difficult. In fact, I'm not sure I could find an example in the world of a city that has created tons of amazing startups without having a lot of patents in that city coming out of universities and research centers. We simply don't, right? We don't even graduate a lot of software engineers.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's really limited. So you have those things already in place where it's like, all right, well, let's see how many hands we're going to tie behind our back and go try to do this. Now, we do have things that draw a lot of talent here, right? Like incredible quality of life for starters, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things I used to do at Venture Asheville, when I was building our, either recruiting investors or recruiting mentors, I would just look on LinkedIn, right? And just search Asheville Facebook, Asheville Twitter, Asheville, like all these, like the TechCrunch 50 companies, Asheville, like I'd run all these searches, just say like, who's moved here? Because people are constantly moving here with these sick backgrounds. Or I'd type in like Asheville, Austin, Asheville, San Francisco, Asheville, like, or the top MBA programs or whatever it was. And I'd like, and ended up like recruiting this, like, I thought pretty incredible base of mentors who didn't know each other, who were like, they're like, why did 6 of us have like Harvard MBAs? That's weird. And it's like, yeah, that's like, right. And it's not like as weird as you think it is, because I'm trying to like bring resources to our entrepreneurs who they can't access on their own. Okay. Yeah. So part of my thought process in starting that mentor program was we're going to bring these really bright minds, successful people who have moved to Asheville. We're going to kind of pull them into the ecosystem, have them start working with our startups. Our startups will benefit from their knowledge, and maybe there'll be some other dynamics. Maybe some of these folks will jump onto one of these teams, right? And then you have a stronger co-founding team. Or maybe once all these folks start meeting each other, they'll form some teams. And then you'll just get like an A team of like amazing people who moved to Asheville. They're going to work some. This is my speculation, but it's something that kind of I've encountered routinely, is that generally speaking, that person who's worked for Facebook who's moved here, right? Or that person who's working for Intel who is here, or whatever, name an awesome company, right? They moved here. They didn't even move to like Raleigh, right? Like, they're not looking for like their next, like, I'm going to work my ass off startup and be in a company 60 to 70 hours a week and build a rocket ship. Like, they moved to Asheville to not do that, right? So like, they bring this wealth of experience and probably maybe even their job with them, but it's not like they're saying, hey, plug me into that Asheville startup community necessarily as a rule, right? They're not necessarily saying like, I want to get involved. I see there's activity. I want to do something here. This would be great. I want to build a startup from Asheville. There's a thesis that says that that's what will happen, but the evidence that I've seen is that's not necessarily how it goes. And so until there's enough kind of like momentum and excitement, I think, kind of churning up from like what's here, where some of those folks saying like, whoa, actually, you know what? Like, instead of me just sitting in my awesome home working for my startup in Austin, actually, let me go down to 1 million cups of coffee, or let me show up at that event. Like, the potential exists, but it's not being realized. There's one more different point I would just make, kind of just in my observations. There was a study that came out from the Kauffman Foundation, which is the largest foundation in America that looks at supporting entrepreneurship. That was did a case study, I think, on Chattanooga, Chattanooga, a little bit bigger than Asheville, but a much bigger startup success story. Yeah. Also kind of a lifestyle town, though. On what were the kind of top 5 things that we see as a case study that others might replicate. I don't remember all of them, and I don't remember thinking that they were all replicable. I think sometimes like success sort of, attributes are unique to a place. And I thought, I can't remember exactly what it was, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But they had things that I didn't think were necessarily transferable, except one thing that they talked about that I'm now seeing like happen in Miami in a huge way, in other cities, is they talked about you need your city leadership and really like your mayor to be an extremely vocal proponent of startups. Not small business, not entrepreneurship, startups. Now, a mayor can't necessarily just legislate on their own by his or herself, right? Like, in different cities are structured, but cities that succeed have mayors who show up at startup events, have mayors who talk about startups, have mayors that talk about the doors are open here with welcome arms, bring your VCs, bring the best found, we want you all here. And they speak the language of startups. Wow. I have a lot of respect for our mayor, but she doesn't do that. Yeah. Occasionally she'll, but it's not in her to do it. The mayor of Miami just announced an entrepreneur in residence, like a venture capital in residence for the city. They've got like, he's texting people or replying to tweets of like junior programmers who are like, I'm trying to look for a place for live. And he's like texting with them, right? It's like, he's all in on it. Yeah. And that, cannot be underestimated how powerful that, in itself can be.
I think that is, I think it's a great insight. I look forward to finding that article. And I'm wondering if, all I can't remember what they say about families. I probably have it backwards, but all happy families are happy in their own unique ways, and all unhappy families are unhappy in the same ways. And I'm wondering if cities that are, high growth or successful are successful in their own unique ways. But I don't remember the other quote, so I probably shouldn't have said it. But I think you're on to something. And I'm wondering, what role making it in Asheville, what we're calling media company in 2021, as opposed to our podcast in 2020, what our little media company, what role we get to play in helping tell some of the meaningful stories of not just small business owners and not just the folks who are trying to build high growth businesses, but all of the different versions of self-employed creators and community organizers. Like, what does it mean to be the place where those stories get told in cool ways? I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the future of this little small city that punches way above its weight class. When you look at like who we get compared to for being 90,000 people who are here all the time to, be spoken about with populations of 1 million or 500,000, 600,000 in the same sentence is like kind of crazy. And so it's to me, it's like hard that Boulder is in the same conversation as Asheville when, it's both unfair and kind of cool, like that we're being considered of that caliber or potentially of that caliber.
Well, we're being considered, there's a question
of brand appeal, right? Like,
yeah, in terms of brand appeal. And I remember when we were working on kind of the next, I think it would have been, was this 2015? We were working on the next kind of 5-year economic development plan at the chamber and our economic development organization, which I just remember in its own right being funny because it was like the only places I know that have like 5-year development plans are like Asheville and China, like communist countries. But like, okay, cool. So let's work on this. And I remember the consultants. So it shows you what I know about economic development, because apparently like everyone has a 5-year plan. But they were like, okay, you've arrived, right? You've arrived. And so by meaning arrived, you are now in the consideration set
yes.
for talent and companies that are going to move somewhere with like you said, like just think of like what's currently a hip, cool city. And like, we're in that sort of, that set of places. That might mean we're competing against Nashville, certainly Boulder, but also Bend, Oregon, which is probably more comparable in size, but has that sort of mind share of being like maybe a place I want to go. Right. And so, yeah, I think absolutely, we're talking about things that are missing from Asheville, but we can only get to talk about those because you have a foundation that's already so high, so well established, and entrepreneurs, who are crushing it across a wider landscape than just like software, right? We have like, anything I say is going to be incredibly obvious. Restaurants, breweries, right? It's like, it's
outdoor brands.
It's outdoor brands. It's incredible. The things, when you think about opportunities to take advantage of, that's now what you're talking about. I remember being in this meeting with some of the local leadership of GE Aviation, and just to think like GE Aviation is here, right? Like all these, like, we have multi-billion-dollar companies here. And so, but the head of human resources for GE Aviation, who ended up going back to their headquarters in Cincinnati, she said to those of us in the room, she was like, look, like Asheville has this incredibly unique opportunity because you're small enough for like everyone to know each other. Right. And in a certain sense, that's true, right? Like you're small enough for like everyone to know each other. And yet you're big enough for us to be here, right? For like GE Aviation to be in your community, right? And there's, plenty of other multinationals who are here as well, and more on the way, which is awesome. And so she's like, how do you take advantage of that strategically from an economic development point of view? Like, one, how do you tell that story? Because that's really appealing, right? Like, but what could be the benefits of having a community like that, where so you get more of us, and we're helping more of the younger, or the smaller folks, achieve their goals. And we're learning from like what synergies could be created because you occupy a really interesting space that so many other cities, just simply can't occupy. And those go, I think, to the potential that's still here that leaders and others can tap into and can still work on.
Well, dang. More questions than answers in this episode, and I love it. Again, it leaves me feeling hopeful and inspired. And we will round out this episode with just a handful. It's not speed round, but these are questions that show up often. When I say the word Asheville and community, what do you think of?
Prosperity.
We can leave it there. That's a great word association. With Asheville specifically, when you aren't all in, head down on Assembly, what do you find yourself getting into?
Well, I still have this, broader abiding passion for design and sustainability. So I'm still building the lazy environmentalist and working on content and a content strategy to capture a wider view of innovation in the market. So I get into that. And I also get into playing a lot of football with my 10-year-old, soon to be 11-year-old son. Soccer with my daughters. I mean, this is one of the benefits, the bright sides of the pandemic, is that we, fully taking advantage of this time that we have together, which will change at some point. We're very excited that NASCAR season is starting up again. It's
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's a little bit of maybe an outlier for an environmentalist, but we are big NASCAR fans and a NASCAR family. So
I would not this podcast, but we'll have to talk NASCAR. That's fantastic. I'm a degree or two from some big NASCAR enthusiasts and some folks that work at NASCAR. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, man. We're so well situated, right? We go up to Bristol, we go down to Charlotte Motor Speedway, we've been over to Martinsville. Yeah, we're into it. In fact, I connected probably a couple years ago with some of the marketing folks at NASCAR, because we also play fantasy NASCAR, where every week we're predicting and picking our drivers in the order they're going to come in.
You mean like your family is all in on this, or your friends?
We've all been, but no, me and my son, Shep. Shep actually got the family into NASCAR, and it mostly came out of the Cars movies.
Oh, great movies,
right?
Great movies, yeah. Incredible.
And so we became, by virtue probably of geography and his interests, we became a NASCAR family.
Wow.
And so he and I do fantasy NASCAR every week. And I think it was 2 years ago, with like hundreds of thousands of people on NASCAR.com, right? And so 2 weeks ago, after the first 2 weeks in the season, my son, who was then 8 or 9, I want to say, was number one on NASCAR.com in the world in fantasy. He had called the first 2 races top to bottom, like top 5, stage 1, stage 2, and win. Like, he was number one. And so that Monday morning, after we saw the ranking update, my wife's like, you gotta call somebody. Like, he needs to get on ESPN, or this is amazing. So I found some of the higher ups at NASCAR, and I wrote him, and I explained the situation. I'm like, you got an 8-year-old, who's number one. This is his name is the Crazy Fader, is what he goes by. Yeah. And I'm thinking, I know you got this problem with fans aging out of NASCAR. You don't have a lot of younger. So within an hour, 2 of them called me, and they're like, "Tell me about Shep. We got to get him on our podcast." So there's a video clip of him with Steve Letarte, if you don't know how closely you follow, but one of their announcers who runs the weekly podcast. There's a video of Shep dressed up in his Kyle Busch, yellow uniform, because that's his favorite driver, giving his picks for the upcoming week on, who folks should be looking at and why. So it's pretty epic.
Unbelievable. I love that we unearthed that gem in the cheap seats of the episode. Unbelievable. All of my other questions are thrown out. I need to immediately hop on to LinkedIn. I think I know the CEO of NASCAR. I gotta check. He might have went to my high school. If he's not the CEO, he's very, very, very senior. And this is a huge deal. So I will make a connection immediately. Wow. If our listeners today would like to follow you, your story, Simbly, and more, where might they go on the World Wide Web or social media?
So you can follow us. You can see Simbly at simbly.com. You can also follow things more generally that I'm covering at lazyenvironmentalist.com. And, through there, you can find us on any social media channel. We're pretty much everywhere. I tend to do more of my personal posting on LinkedIn. But, we have Simbly's pretty active on Instagram and elsewhere as well.
Amazing. Well, I cannot thank you enough for your time. I think that the notes on this episode, show notes, will be available. All of the links will be available, but there are very, very meaningful nuggets that got unearthed. Not just that your son is the greatest NASCAR predictor of the early 2021 season of all time, but just on what it is, how to approach opportunity, how to approach business building, and thinking about what the goal is before thinking about what the next step is. I again cannot thank you enough, and I look forward to seeing you at a coffee shop in hopefully not too distant future.
Thank you, Tony. You are a truly wonderful, insightful host. This was just it was a terrific conversation. I really appreciate it.
We'll do it again soon.